What would you do if your own mother abandoned you at an airport, flying off to Europe with her new family while you were left behind? Lily had spent 2 years watching her mother build a perfect life, one where Lily didn't belong. But when they planned a summer trip to Europe, she never imagined they would leave without her. One moment, she was in the airport bathroom. The next, she was alone, no money, no ID, no way to call for help. Her mother thought she was disposable. She thought Lily would just disappear. She was wrong. Stay tuned to see how Lily finds the truth, takes back her life, and don't forget to subscribe for more gripping stories. My name is Lily, and I'm 15 now. Looking back, it's almost impossible to believe how much my life has changed in just 2 years. I guess that's what happens when your whole world gets turned upside down twice. It all started when I was 13. My parents got divorced and Mom got the house. I stayed with her, of course. Dad agreed to pay a lot in alimony. I once overheard Mom on the phone, bragging about it like she'd won some kind of prize. "I finally got what I deserved," she said, laughing. "Why did you and Dad split up?" I asked her countless times in those first few months. But she'd just shake her head and give me the same cold, rehearsed answer. "Your father made his choice, Lily. He doesn't want to be part of our lives anymore. He doesn't want to see you. It's better if you just accept that." But how could I accept something that made no sense? My dad, the same man who used to call me his little scientist and spent hours helping me with my homework, how could he just stop wanting to be my father? The thought of it hurt so much that sometimes I felt like I couldn't breathe. Then, the emails started. Every holiday, like clockwork, I'd get an anonymous message. Nothing long, nothing fancy, just simple words of love and encouragement. The first time I saw one, my heart nearly stopped. I knew it had to be from Dad. Who else would write, "Keep reaching for the stars, sweetheart"? The exact same thing he used to say to me every night before bed. I never told Mom. I couldn't. Just mentioning Dad's name was enough to make her face twist up like she'd tasted something bitter. After the divorce, she quit her job. She claimed she needed time to heal, but I wasn't stupid. Dad's alimony checks were more than enough to keep us comfortable. She spent her days redecorating the house, going to yoga classes, and talking about finding herself. Then Richard came into the picture. She said she met him at yoga, and before I knew it, our house was filled with talk about new beginnings and blended families. Then, just like that, Richard and his kids Ethan, who's 13, and Chloe, who's 11, moved in. That's when everything really changed. Mom turned into someone I didn't recognize, doting over Ethan and Chloe like they were delicate porcelain dolls that might shatter if she didn't handle them just right. She spent hours doing Chloe's hair, making Ethan's favorite meals, and gushing over how lucky we were to have them in our lives. Meanwhile, I sat at the kitchen table, feeling like a ghost in my own home. "Mom," I said one day when I couldn't take it anymore, "it's like you've forgotten I exist." She gave me a look I'd never seen before, part pity, part annoyance. "Don't be selfish, Lily. Ethan and Chloe lost their mother when they were babies. They need extra attention and care. You should understand that. You're old enough now." That was the moment I realized it. I wasn't part of this new, perfect family. I was just an extra, an afterthought, something that didn't quite fit into the polished picture Mom was trying to create. She became obsessed with taking family photos. Every weekend, she'd dress us up like we were going to a magazine shoot, coordinating our outfits down to the smallest detail. Ethan and Chloe always got new clothes for these photos, while I had to dig through my closet for anything that matched. "Lily, stand behind Ethan. No, move to the left. Try to smile more naturally," she would instruct, adjusting her phone camera to get the perfect shot. "Chloe, sweetie, tilt your head just a bit. Perfect." I would force a smile. I would stand where she told me, and every time I saw the pictures later, beautifully framed and proudly displayed around the house, I would notice the same thing. I was barely visible. These photo shoots would go on for hours sometimes, click after click, pose after pose, until Mom got exactly what she wanted for her social media feed. The worst part came afterward, when she'd show off the results at every family gathering. "Look at how many likes this one got," she'd gush to Aunt Vivian or Uncle Pete. "Everyone says we look like the perfect family. Don't the kids look amazing together? You'd never guess they weren't always siblings. I'd stand there feeling like a prop in someone else's play while Mom bragged about our beautiful blended family to anyone who would listen. The photos never showed the reality, how Chloe would roll her eyes whenever I entered a room, or how Ethan acted like I didn't exist. The hardest part wasn't the fake smiles or the endless posing. It was being cut off from Grandma Rose, my dad's mother. After the divorce, Mom made it clear that visiting her was out of the question. I missed Grandma's warm hugs and the way she'd listen to me for hours, really listen, not just pretend to while scrolling through her phone. Now all I had were memories of baking cookies in her kitchen and the sound of her laugh. Instead, I was stuck with Mom's relatives who bought into her perfect family narrative hook, line, and sinker. They cooed over Ethan and Chloe, praising Mom for being such an amazing stepmother, while I sat in the corner wondering if I'd become invisible. As months passed, the distance between Mom and me grew wider than the Grand Canyon. She lived and breathed her new family, planning everything around Ethan and Chloe's schedules and preferences. Family movie night, Ethan. What would you like to watch? Weekend plans, Chloe, honey. Where should we go for lunch? My opinion didn't matter anymore. I'd sit there during family discussions, watching Mom lean in eagerly to hear what restaurant Chloe wanted to try or which movie Ethan was interested in seeing. Sometimes I'd open my mouth to make a suggestion, but Mom would already be grabbing her keys, excited about Ethan's choice of the new superhero film or Chloe's pick of the fancy ice cream place across town. One Sunday morning, as they were all getting ready for another family outing, I stayed in my room. Nobody came to ask why. Nobody tried to convince me to join them. I could hear Chloe's voice through my door saying, "Good, now we don't have to pretend to include her." Mom's response? Silence. Summer arrived with the kind of announcement that used to make me excited as a kid. Mom and Richard gathered everyone in the living room one evening, practically buzzing with enthusiasm. "We have amazing news," Mom announced, clasping Richard's hand. "We're planning a month-long trip to Europe." Ethan and Chloe immediately erupted in cheers. "Can we go to Paris?" Chloe squealed. "I want to see the Eiffel Tower." "And Barcelona," Ethan chimed in. "They have the best soccer stadium in the world." I sat there on the couch watching them bounce around the room like lottery winners. Nobody looked in my direction. Nobody asked what I thought about spending a month in Europe. It was like I was watching a TV show about a happy family, one I wasn't part of. The morning of the trip started early. I was in my room, double-checking my packing list, when a faint rustling sound caught my attention. Looking up, I froze. Chloe stood by my dresser, my favorite blue swimsuit in one hand, a pair of scissors in the other. Her fingers gripped the fabric as she slowly, deliberately sliced through it, a small, satisfied smile curving her lips. For a second, I couldn't move. I knew Chloe didn't like me. She had made that painfully clear over the past 2 years. But this was different. This wasn't just passive-aggressive comments or stolen belongings. This was cruel. The shock wore off in an instant. I lunged forward, reaching for the scissors. "Give me those!" Chloe yanked back, twisting away from me, and suddenly we were locked in a struggle. She was smaller but shockingly strong. As we fought for control, her face contorted into something wild, and then she started screaming. "Help! Lily is attacking me!" The thunder of footsteps pounded up the stairs. Within seconds, Mom and Richard burst into the room, finding us tangled, breathless, the mutilated swimsuit lying between us. "She tried to hurt me!" Chloe wailed, throwing herself into her father's arms. "I was just standing here and she went crazy." "That's not true," I shot back. "She was cutting up my swimsuit. I was trying to stop her." Mom's gaze barely flicked to the ruined scraps on the floor before turning on me with cold fury. "What is wrong with you, Lily? Are you really so jealous of Chloe that you'd physically attack her? Go to your room and stay there until we leave for the airport. Clearly, you can't be trusted around her." They left, taking Chloe with them, her sobs echoing down the hall. Through my closed door, I could hear Mom's voice, gentle now, reassuring. "Don't worry, sweetie. We'll go to the mall right now and buy you some new clothes to help you feel better after this awful experience." I sat on my bed, staring at the shredded pieces of my swimsuit, listening as they left for their shopping trip. Nobody asked if I needed a new one. Nobody cared that I was telling the truth. Evening came and we all gathered in the foyer, suitcases lined up neatly by the door. Mom was checking her list one final time while Richard loaded the luggage into the waiting taxi. "I still think you don't deserve this trip after what you did to Chloe," Mom muttered, shooting me a look colder than the night air outside. "But we can't leave you home alone for a month, so you'll have to come. Just try not to cause any more problems." Inside the airport, everything felt overwhelming: voices, announcements, the constant shuffle of travelers moving in every direction. We made our way to the check-in desk, where Mom handed over our documents. My stomach twisted, a strange, uneasy feeling creeping over me. Maybe it was the exhaustion, maybe it was the tension hanging in the air, or maybe it was something else, something I couldn't quite name. "Mom," I said hesitantly, shifting my weight, "I need to use the bathroom." She barely glanced up, too busy rummaging through her oversized purse. "Fine, but hurry up. We can't miss our flight because of you." "Should I take my bag?" I gestured to my carry-on, suddenly unsure. "Just leave it," she snapped. "I'm not having you wander off with our documents and money." I nodded and turned toward the restroom signs, weaving through the crowd. The airport was massive, and the signs were confusing. I had to double back twice before finally finding the bathroom. By the time I washed my hands and stepped back out, at least 10 minutes had passed. But when I returned to the check-in area, my family was gone. At first, I thought I had gotten turned around. My heartbeat picked up as I scanned the counters. "Mom?" My voice wavered, rising in pitch. "Richard?" Nothing. The uneasy feeling in my stomach sank into something darker, something colder. They were gone. People turned to look at me, but none of them were my family. I started running, my feet slapping against the shiny airport floor as I searched desperately. Maybe they'd gone through security already, but how could I follow? Mom had all my documents in her purse. I had no phone. It was in my bag. No money. Mom had that too. No ID, no boarding pass, nothing. I ran back to the check-in area, then to the bathrooms again, then to the food court. Time seemed to blur as I searched frantically, my panic growing with each passing minute. People streamed past me, dragging their suitcases, hugging their families goodbye, living their normal lives while my world was falling apart. Finally, after what felt like hours, but was probably just one, I couldn't run anymore. I stood in the middle of the terminal surrounded by strangers and burst into tears. Not quiet, dignified tears, but huge, gasping sobs that shook my whole body. "Are you all right, sweetheart?" A gentle voice broke through my crying. I looked up to see a woman in an airport uniform, her face creased with concern. "Where are your parents?" I tried to explain through my tears, the words coming out in broken gasps. They left. I just went to the bathroom. They had all my things." The woman's face changed as she understood what I was saying. She put an arm around my shoulders and led me through a door Richarded airport personnel only. Before I knew it, I was sitting in a small office while serious-looking people in security uniforms asked me questions and made phone calls. They reviewed the security footage, their faces growing grimmer as they watched. One of them was taking notes, writing up an official police report. "It's confirmed," I heard one officer say to another. "They checked in, waited until she was gone, then proceeded to their gate and boarded their flight. They've already taken off." "Is there anyone we can call for you?" one of the police officers asked, his voice gentler now. "Any adult relatives who could come get you?" I wiped my eyes with the tissue they'd given me. "My dad," I said quietly. "I haven't seen him in 2 years, but I know his name and where he used to work." They took down the information, and I heard them making calls in the next room. I sat there, wrapped in a borrowed airport blanket, trying not to think about the plane that was probably already over the Atlantic, carrying my mother and her real family away from me. "Lily?" A familiar voice made me look up, and suddenly I couldn't breathe. Dad stood in the doorway, looking exactly like I remembered, but somehow different too. His hair had more gray in it, and he seemed tired, but his eyes, they were the same eyes that used to check for monsters under my bed and light up when I showed him my science fair projects. "Dad?" My voice cracked, and then I was running, and he was catching me in his arms like I was 7 years old again, and we were both crying. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart," he kept saying. "I'm so, so sorry." The drive to his place was surreal. I sat in the passenger seat of his car, stealing glances at him, afraid he might disappear if I looked away too long. He lived in a different part of the city now, in a large apartment building I'd never seen before. "There's someone I want you to meet," he said as we rode the elevator to the 8th floor. "My fiancée, Olivia. She's been my rock through everything." Olivia turned out to be a warm-faced woman with curly red hair who took one look at me and wrapped me in a hug like she'd known me all my life. "You poor thing," she said, leading me to the kitchen. "You must be starving. I'm making you a proper meal right now. No arguments." While Olivia busied herself with cooking, Dad and I sat at the kitchen table. The familiar smell of coffee filled the air. He still drank it the same way, black with just a touch of sugar. "Lily," he said finally, his hands wrapped around his coffee mug. "I think it's time you knew the truth about what happened 2 years ago." That day, I came home early from work. I wasn't supposed to be there, but a meeting had been canceled. His voice was steady, but I could see his hands shaking slightly. "I found your mother in our living room with Richard. They weren't just talking." I felt my stomach clench as I understood what he meant. "When I confronted them, Richard tried to act tough. We got into a fight. Not my proudest moment. Your mother tried to get between us, and one of us, I'm still not sure who, accidentally pushed her as we were struggling. She fell and hit the coffee table pretty hard." Dad's voice caught. "There was blood on her face from where she'd hit it, and her hands were all scraped up. I tried to help her, but before I could, she looked right at me and said if I didn't do exactly what she wanted, she'd go to the police. She said she'd tell them I beat her, that she had the bruises to prove it. She said I'd go to jail and I'd never see you again." He looked at me, his eyes full of pain. "She gave me her terms: divorce, the house, alimony, and I had to stay away from you completely. Away. She said if I tried to contact you or tell you the truth, she'd follow through on her threat." The next morning, I was sitting at the kitchen counter picking at my breakfast when Olivia sat down next to me with a determined look on her face. "Lily," she said, stirring her coffee thoughtfully. "My brother Andrew is a family law attorney. He's really good at what he does, and I think he can help us with your situation." Dad looked up from his newspaper hope flickering across his face. "You think he'd take the case?" "Are you kidding?" Olivia pulled out her phone. "When I told him what happened at the airport, he was ready to come over right then and there. He's just waiting for us to give him the go-ahead." Everything moved fast after that. Andrew turned out to be a tall man with Olivia's same red hair and kind eyes, but there was a quiet steel beneath his gentle demeanor. He sat with us at the dining room table, taking meticulous notes as I told my story. He made calls right then and there, his voice shifting into what Olivia called his lawyer mode. Within hours, he had filed paperwork with Child Protective Services and the guardianship authorities. They took over the case immediately. Apparently, abandoning your child at an airport tends to get people's attention. A couple of days later, Dad suggested we visit someone special. "There's someone who's been missing you like crazy," he said as we drove through familiar neighborhoods. "Someone who never stopped asking about you." When we pulled up to Grandma Rose's house, my heart nearly stopped. It looked exactly the same. The warm yellow paint, the flower boxes in the windows, even the old porch swing where we used to sit and drink lemonade. The front door flew open before we even reached it. "Lily!" Grandma cried, and suddenly I was wrapped in one of her famous bear hugs, the kind that smelled like cinnamon and fresh laundry. "Oh, my sweet girl, let me look at you." We spent the afternoon flipping through old photo albums, eating Grandma's famous chocolate chip cookies, and catching up on lost time. She showed me the birthday cards she had written but never sent, kept safe in a drawer alongside newspaper clippings of my school's honor roll listings. She had saved everything. Days turned into weeks, and before I knew it, a month had passed. Mom and her perfect new family were still in Europe, living their best lives, at least according to their social media posts. Every day, new pictures would pop up on my feed. Chloe posing in front of the Eiffel Tower, Ethan at the Colosseum, Mom and Richard having candlelit dinners in Paris. Not once did they try to contact me. Not one message asking if I was safe, if I had somewhere to stay, if I was okay. Mom had my phone, my laptop, all my clothes, everything I owned except for what I had been wearing that day at the airport. But apparently, none of that concerned her. I logged into my social media accounts from Dad's computer, and I could see them, all active. They posted pictures, liked other people's updates, commented on friends' posts. They could see that I was online too. The little green dot next to my name made that clear. But nothing. Not even a single "hope you're alive" text. It was Dad's idea for me to be waiting at the house when they returned. I sat in the living room, my heart pounding as I heard the taxi pull up outside. Dad was hidden away in Mom's home office, waiting for the right moment. We could hear their voices through the front door, laughing and chattering about their amazing European adventure. The key turned in the lock, and they all burst in, arms weighed down with shopping bags and suitcases. They froze when they saw me sitting there. "Well, well," Mom said, recovering quickly and plastering on a smug smile. "Look who found her way home." Richard chuckled, dropping their bags by the stairs. "See, we told you she'd be fine." That's when Dad stepped out of the office. The change in Mom's face was instant. Her smug smile vanished, replaced by shock and then fury. "What the hell are you doing in my house?" she shrieked, backing up against Richard. "Get out right now!" Dad stood his ground, his voice calm but firm. "I'm here to tell you how this is going to go, Vivian. I'm taking Lily with me permanently this time. I've already filed for full custody, and I'm suing for termination of your parental rights. The paperwork's already been filed with the court." Mom's face went white, then red. "You can't do that!" "I can and I have, and that's not all." Dad's voice got harder. "There's also the criminal charges for child endangerment. Abandoning a minor at an airport, that carries serious jail time for both of you." He looked pointedly at Richard. Mom's voice shook with rage. "You think anyone will believe you after what you did to me? I still have pictures of my injuries. I'll tell everyone how you beat me." Dad actually smiled then, but it wasn't a happy smile. "Go ahead." My lawyer already prepared for that old lie, but here's the thing. Vivian, you didn't file a police report right away, and now you've destroyed your own credibility when you abandoned our daughter at an airport. It's all on video, every single second of you walking away, boarding that plane, enjoying your European vacation, while our 15-year-old daughter was left alone without money, phone, or ID. What kind of mother does that? We. Mom looked desperately at Richard, who seemed to be trying to fade into the background. "No judge is going to believe your accusations now," Dad said, his voice calm but firm. "Not after what you did. Not with the police report, the airport footage, the social media posts, all proving you didn't even bother to check if your daughter was safe. You showed your true colors, Vivian, and now you're going to face the consequences." The trial moved faster than anyone expected. Andrew said it was because the evidence was overwhelming. The airport footage, the police report, the endless stream of posts showing them gallivanting around Europe while I was abandoned, there was nothing to argue. The judge barely needed time to decide. Mom lost all parental rights. The alimony payments Dad had been making were terminated immediately, and full custody was granted to him. Though, honestly, that just made official what we all already knew. I was never going back to that house. Mom and Richard each got a year of probation, plus a fine so steep it made Richard's face go ghostly pale when the amount was announced. But watching them squirm didn't bring the satisfaction I thought it would. I just felt nothing. Like watching the final scene of a movie about someone else's life. That was 6 months ago. Now, I'm sitting in my new room in Dad and Olivia's apartment, debating which earrings to wear to their wedding next month. Olivia asked me to be her bridesmaid, and the dress we picked out, a soft summer sky blue, hangs on my closet door, waiting. I don't know what happened to Mom and her real family after the trial. They moved away. Aunt Jenny told me that much. Surprisingly, most of Mom's relatives took our side once they found out what happened. "Blood doesn't excuse what she did to you," Jenny had said, her voice firm. "Grandma Rose comes over for Sunday dinner now, always bringing her famous chocolate chip cookies and a new story about Dad's childhood ones that make him groan while I laugh. Sometimes we flip through old photo albums together, but we're making new memories too, filling fresh pages with photos of moments that actually matter. I transferred to Riverside High after everything settled down. No way was I going to keep going to school with Ethan and Chloe. Turns out, it was the best decision I ever made. My new friends, especially Rachel and Kim, are the kind of friends I never had before. They don't know the full story of why I transferred, but they know enough to understand why I sometimes fall quiet when people talk about their moms. Once in a while, I catch myself wondering about Mom, Richard, Ethan, and Chloe. But it's like wondering about characters from a book I read long ago, distant, faded. I blocked them all on social media not out of anger, just because I don't need to know anymore. I'm done being the ghost in their perfect family photos. Dad says I'm stronger than he ever was at my age. Maybe he's right. But I think I'm just lucky. Lucky to have him, Olivia, Grandma Rose, and all the people who showed me what real family looks like. The ones who stand by you, who fight for you, who make sure you never have to question whether you're loved. What do you do when the people who are supposed to love you the most make it clear that you were never part of their perfect picture? When they erase you from their lives, hoping you'll simply disappear? Lily spent years trying to understand why her mother pushed her aside, why she became nothing more than a background figure in a family that wasn't even hers. She watched as her mother lavished attention on her new step-siblings as she was left out, ignored, and eventually discarded. But the day they abandoned her at the airport, they did more than just leave her behind, they set her free. Because in that moment, Lily learned the truth. No matter how much she had tried to fit in, no matter how many family photos she forced a smile for, she was never part of their story. And if they had no space for her, why should she keep space for them? Now she's with the people who truly love her. Her father, the one person who never stopped fighting for her. Olivia, who welcomed her with open arms. Grandma Rose, who never forgot about her. And for the first time in years, Lily is building a life where she is more than just an afterthought. She is wanted. So here's the question. If you were in Lily's shoes, would you have given your mother a chance to explain? Or would you have walked away just like she did? Let's talk about it in the comments. And if you found this story compelling, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more.
The box slipped from my hands, crashing to the floor and shattering the fragile piece of our new home. I froze, waiting for the inevitable. "Sarah?" Helen's shrill voice pierced the air. "What on earth are you doing up there?" I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and plastered on a smile before descending the stairs. "I'm so sorry, Helen. It was an accident. I'll clean it up right away." My mother-in-law stood at the bottom of the staircase, arms crossed, her lips pursed in disapproval. "Honestly, Sarah, you'd think you'd be more careful with our things. This isn't some college dorm room, you know." I bit my tongue, reminding myself that this was temporary. Adam and I just needed to save up enough for our own place. Then we'd be free. Speaking of Adam, where was he? My husband had conveniently disappeared the moment we'd arrived at his parents' house this morning. "Where's Adam?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. Helen waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, his father needed help with something in the garage. You know how men are with their projects." I did know. It was amazing how many projects Adam managed to find whenever there was actual work to be done. "Well, I'd better get that mess cleaned up," I said, turning to head back upstairs. Helen's voice stopped me. "Wait just a minute, Sarah. While you're up there, you might as well start unpacking your things. I've cleared out some space in the guest room closet for you and Adam." I blinked in surprise. The guest room? But I thought we'd be staying in Adam's old room. Helen's laugh was like nails on a chalkboard. "Oh, honey, that room is much too small for two people. Besides, I use it as my sewing room now. The guest room will be much more comfortable for you both." I opened my mouth to argue, but thought better of it. This was Helen's house, after all. "Of course," I said instead. "Thank you for your hospitality." As I climbed the stairs, I could hear Helen muttering something about ungrateful children and "in my day." I gritted my teeth and kept moving. The guest room was small and stuffy, with floral wallpaper that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 1970s. A narrow double bed took up most of the space, leaving barely enough room for our suitcases. I sighed and started picking up the shards of the broken vase, careful not to cut myself. As I worked, I heard the front door open and Adam's voice drift up the stairs. "Mom? Sarah? I'm back!" "In here, sweetie," Helen called out. "Your wife had a little accident with one of my vases. Why don't you go help her clean up?" I rolled my eyes. Of course, she'd throw me under the bus. Adam appeared in the doorway, looking sheepish. "Hey, babe, need a hand?" I looked up at him, trying to keep the frustration out of my voice. "Where have you been?" He shrugged. "Dad needed help with the lawnmower. You know how it is." "Right," I said, turning back to my task. "Well, since you're here, you can start unpacking. Your mom says we're staying in the guest room." Adam's brow furrowed. "The guest room? But I thought—" "Your old room is her sewing room now, apparently," I cut him off. "Oh," he said, looking uncomfortable. "Well, I'm sure it'll be fine. It's just temporary, right?" I stood up, dumping the broken pieces into the trash. "Right, temporary." As I brushed past him to wash my hands, Adam caught my arm. "Hey," he said softly. "I know this isn't ideal, but we'll make it work. I promise." I wanted to believe him. I really did. But as I looked into his eyes, all I could see was the same weakness that had led us here in the first place. The sound of Helen calling us down to dinner broke the moment. Adam squeezed my hand and headed downstairs, leaving me alone in the tiny room that was supposed to be our new home. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was sure to be a long and trying evening. As I reached for the doorknob, I caught sight of my reflection in the mirror. The woman staring back at me looked tired, defeated. "Come on, Sarah," I whispered to myself. "You can do this. It's just temporary." But even as I said the words, a nagging voice in the back of my mind whispered, "What if it's not?" The world came into focus slowly, like an old television warming up. Harsh, fluorescent lights burned my eyes, and the antiseptic smell of a hospital filled my nostrils. I blinked, trying to make sense of my surroundings. "Sarah, can you hear me?" A man's voice, unfamiliar yet tinged with concern. I turned my head, wincing at the dull ache. A doctor stood beside my bed, clipboard in hand. Behind him I could see my parents, James and Elizabeth, their faces etched with worry. "What happened?" I croaked, my throat dry and scratchy. The doctor leaned in. "You fainted at home and hit your head. Your mother-in-law called an ambulance." "Mother-in-law?" I frowned, searching my memory. Nothing. "Sarah," my mom said, stepping forward. "How are you feeling, sweetheart?" I managed a weak smile. "Confused. What day is it?" "It's Tuesday," my dad answered. "You've been out for about 6 hours." Tuesday. Okay, that made sense. I remembered going to work on Monday, but after that, nothing. "Where's Adam?" I asked, the name coming to me suddenly. My husband. But when I tried to picture his face, my mind drew a blank. My parents exchanged a glance. "He's in the waiting room with Helen," my mom said carefully. "Do you want us to get them?" Helen, another name without a face. I shook my head, panic rising in my chest. I can't remember them. "Mom, Dad, what's happening to me?" The doctor stepped in, his voice calm and reassuring. "Sarah, I believe you're experiencing a form of psychogenic amnesia. It's often triggered by stress or traumatic events. Your memory loss seems to be specific to your husband and mother-in-law. Can you tell me the last thing you remember clearly?" I closed my eyes, concentrating. Work. I remember being at work on Monday. After that, it's fuzzy. "Interesting," the doctor murmured, making a note on his clipboard. "Sarah, I'd like to run a few more tests if that's all right with you." I nodded, still trying to process what was happening. As the doctor left to arrange the tests, my parents moved closer to the bed. "Honey," my dad said, his voice low, "is there anything you want to tell us? Anything that might have caused this stress?" I looked at him, confused. "What do you mean?" My mom took my hand, her eyes searching mine. "Sarah, we've been worried about you. Ever since you moved in with Adam and Helen, you've seemed different, withdrawn. We thought maybe it was just the adjustment period, but now—" Her words trailed off, but the implication hung in the air. I shook my head, frustrated by the gaps in my memory. "I don't know. I can't remember." Just then, a commotion in the hallway caught our attention. A man's voice, angry and insistent, grew louder as it approached my room. "I don't care what the doctor said. That's my wife in there, and I have a right to see her." The door burst open, and a man I didn't recognize stormed in, followed closely by an older woman. They both stopped short when they saw me, their expressions a mix of relief and something else I couldn't quite place. "Sarah," the man said, moving towards the bed. "Thank God you're awake. We've been so worried." I recoiled instinctively, pressing myself back against the pillows. "Who are you?" The man's face fell, hurt and confusion flashing in his eyes. "Sarah, it's me, Adam, your husband." The older woman stepped forward, her lips pursed. "And I'm Helen, your mother-in-law. Surely you remember us?" I looked from one to the other, searching for any spark of recognition. Nothing, just a vague sense of unease that I couldn't explain. "I'm sorry," I whispered. I can't remember you." Adam reached for my hand, but I pulled away. Something in his touch felt wrong, almost threatening. He frowned, exchanging a loaded glance with Helen. "It's okay, sweetheart," Helen said, her voice sickly sweet. "We'll help you remember. Once you're home with us, I'm sure everything will come back to you." A chill ran down my spine at her words. Home with them? The very thought filled me with a nameless dread. I looked to my parents, silently pleading for help. My dad stepped forward, placing himself between me and the strangers who claimed to be my family. "I think," he said firmly, "that Sarah needs some rest. Perhaps it would be best if you came back later." Adam opened his mouth to argue, but Helen placed a hand on his arm. "Of course," she said smoothly. "We'll be back tomorrow, Sarah. Don't worry about a thing." As they left the room, I caught a glimpse of Adam's face. The look in his eyes sent a shiver through me. It wasn't love or concern I saw there. It was anger. And beneath that, something darker still. The hospital room felt like a sanctuary as I recovered. My parents a constant, comforting presence. But the peace couldn't last forever. After 3 days, the doctors declared me fit to go home. The question was, where exactly was home? "You're coming with us, sweetheart," Mom said firmly as she helped me pack. "Until you get your memories back, you need to be somewhere safe and familiar." I nodded, relief washing over me. The thought of going back to a house I couldn't remember, with people who felt like strangers, terrified me. As we prepared to leave, Adam and Helen arrived. The sight of them still sent an inexplicable chill down my spine. "Sarah, darling," Helen cooed, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "We've come to take you home." I instinctively stepped closer to my father. "Actually, I'm going to stay with my parents for a while." Adam's face darkened. "That's ridiculous. You belong with us, your family." "We are her family," Dad interjected, his voice steely. "And right now, this is what Sarah needs." The tension in the room was palpable. Adam opened his mouth to argue, but Helen laid a hand on his arm. "Of course," she said smoothly. "We understand. But we'll be visiting every day, won't we, Adam? To help jog your memory." Something in her tone made me shudder. As they left, I caught a glimpse of Adam's face. The look he gave me was one of pure, cold fury. Back at my parents' house, I sank into the familiar comfort of my childhood bedroom. But even here, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. "Mom, Dad," I said over dinner that night, "I need to know the truth. What was my life like with Adam and Helen?" They exchanged a worried glance. "Honey," Mom began carefully, "we don't want to influence your memories. The doctor said—" "Please," I interrupted, "I need to know." Dad sighed heavily. "We were worried about you, Sarah. You seemed different, withdrawn. When we'd visit, Helen was always hovering, and Adam, well, he didn't seem like the man you married." A chill ran through me. "What do you mean?" "He was controlling," Mom said softly. "Always speaking for you, making decisions. And Helen, she treated you more like a servant than a daughter-in-law." The words hit me like a physical blow. Flashes of memory started to surface. Helen's critical voice, Adam's tight grip on my arm, the constant feeling of walking on eggshells. "I need to know more," I said, my voice shaking. "I need to remember." Dad leaned forward, his expression serious. "Sarah, we have an idea. It's risky, but it might help us uncover the truth." He explained their plan, to secretly record Adam and Helen's conversations when they visited. It was a violation of privacy, possibly even illegal, but at that moment, I didn't care. "Let's do it," I said firmly. The next day, when Adam and Helen arrived, we were ready. Tiny microphones hidden throughout the living room captured every word. I played my part, feigning confusion and vulnerability. "I'm trying to remember," I said, my voice deliberately weak, "but everything's still so fuzzy." Helen patted my hand, her nails digging in slightly. "Don't worry, dear, we'll have you back home soon enough." "Yes," Adam added, his voice low and intense. "Where you belong." As they left, I caught Helen whispering to Adam, "We need to get her back quickly, before she remembers too much." That night, we gathered around the kitchen table to listen to the recordings. My hands shook as Dad pressed play. Helen's voice, sharp and clear, "We need to be careful. If she remembers how we treated her..." Adam, angry, "She won't, and if she does, we'll make sure she knows her place." I listened, horror growing with each word. The casual cruelty, the plans to isolate me further, the thinly veiled threats, it was all there. As the recording ended, I looked up at my parents, tears streaming down my face. "Oh, God," I whispered. "What do I do now?" Dad's expression was grim. "We fight back. It's time to show Adam and Helen that they can't control you anymore." In that moment, something shifted inside me. The fear and confusion gave way to a burning anger. I nodded, my jaw set. "You're right," I said, my voice stronger than it had been in days. "It's time to take back my life." The next morning, I woke with a sense of determination I hadn't felt in years. The recordings had confirmed my worst fears, but they'd also ignited a fire within me. I was done being a victim. "I want to go back," I announced over breakfast. Mom nearly choked on her coffee. "What, Sarah, you can't be serious." "I am," I said firmly. "We need more evidence," and I hesitated, then plunged on. "I need to face them, to remember everything." Dad's face was grim. "It's dangerous, sweetheart. What if they suspect something?" I squared my shoulders. "Then I'll deal with it, but I can't hide forever." After hours of debate and careful planning, we agreed. I'd return to Adam and Helen's house, wearing a hidden microphone. At the first sign of trouble, I'd use a code word, and my parents would come immediately. As we pulled up to the house, my supposed home, my heart raced. Adam and Helen were waiting on the porch, all smiles and false warmth. "Sarah, darling," Helen exclaimed, enveloping me in a suffocating hug. "We've missed you so much." Adam's embrace was stiff, his eyes cold despite his smile. "Welcome home, honey." I forced myself to smile back, fighting the urge to run. "Thank you. I'm glad to be back." The next few hours were a masterclass in gaslighting. Helen fussed over me, her saccharine concern barely masking her impatience. Adam hovered nearby, his presence a constant unspoken threat. "You must be exhausted, dear," Helen said, steering me towards the stairs. "Why don't you lie down for a bit? I'll bring you some tea." I nodded, grateful for the chance to be alone. But as I reached the top of the stairs, a wave of dizziness hit me. Memories flooded back, Helen's shrill voice berating me, Adam's iron grip on my arm as he dragged me up these very steps. I stumbled, catching myself on the railing. Adam was beside me in an instant, his hand on my back feeling more like a shove than support. "Careful, honey," he said, his voice low. "We wouldn't want you to have another accident." The threat in his tone was unmistakable. I shuddered, suddenly certain that my fainting spell hadn't been an accident at all. In the guest room, our room, I reminded myself, I sat on the edge of the bed, trying to calm my racing heart. The walls seemed to close in around me, years of suppressed memories threatening to overwhelm me. A soft knock at the door made me jump. Helen entered, carrying a steaming cup of tea. "Here you are, dear," she said, handing me the cup. "This should help you relax." I took a small sip, more out of politeness than thirst. The tea had an odd, bitter aftertaste that set alarm bells ringing in my head. "Thank you," I managed, setting the cup aside. "I think I'll try to sleep now." Helen's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Of course. Sweet dreams, Sarah." As soon as the door closed behind her, I dumped the tea into a potted plant. Whatever was in that drink, I was certain it wasn't meant to help me. I lay down, pretending to sleep, straining my ears for any sound. After what felt like hours, I heard hushed voices in the hallway. "She's out cold," Helen whispered. "The sedative worked quickly." "Good," Adam replied. "Now we can discuss how to handle this situation. We can't risk her remembering anything else." My blood ran cold. They had drugged me, and from the sound of it, they were planning something far worse. I reached for my phone, my hands shaking as I typed out a message to my parents. Code red. Come now. As I hit send, the bedroom door creaked open. I quickly closed my eyes, feigning sleep, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure they could hear it. "Poor, confused Sarah." Helen's voice dripped with false sympathy. "Don't worry, dear. We'll make sure you never have to worry about remembering again." In that moment, I knew I had to act. Whatever they had planned, I couldn't wait for rescue. It was time to save myself. My heart pounded as I lay there, feigning sleep while Adam and Helen whispered just outside the door. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I forced myself to remain still, listening intently. "We need to move quickly," Adam muttered. "Her parents are getting suspicious. If they start digging—" Helen's voice was cold and calculating. "Don't worry, I have a plan. We'll make it look like an accident." Poor, confused Sarah, still dizzy from her fall. I suppressed a gasp. They were planning to kill me. The realization hit me like a physical blow, and suddenly the full weight of my situation crashed down upon me. This wasn't just about emotional abuse or control anymore. My life was in danger. As their footsteps retreated down the hall, I cautiously opened my eyes. The room spun slightly. Whatever they'd put in that tea was strong. But I couldn't afford to be weak now. I had to get out. Slowly, carefully, I eased myself off the bed. My legs felt like jelly, but I forced myself to stand. I crept to the door, pressing my ear against it. Silence. Taking a deep breath, I turned the handle and peered out into the hallway, empty. I made my way down the stairs, clinging to the railing for support. As I reached the bottom, a cacophony of memories assaulted me. Helen's shrill voice berating me for every perceived slight. Adam's tight grip on my arm as he dragged me from room to room. The constant feeling of worthlessness and fear that had become my daily existence. Tears stung my eyes, but I blinked them away. There would be time for that later. Right now, I needed to focus on survival. I was halfway to the front door when I heard them coming. Panic surged through me as I looked around frantically for a hiding place. The coat closet, it was my only option. I dove inside, pulling the door closed just as Adam and Helen entered the foyer. "I'll check upstairs," Adam said. "You look down here." My breath caught in my throat as Helen's footsteps approached the closet. I pressed myself against the wall, praying she wouldn't open the door. "Sarah?" Helen called out, her voice sickly sweet. "Where are you, dear? We're worried about you." The doorknob turned, and I braced myself for discovery. But at that moment, a loud crash came from upstairs. "Helen!" Adam shouted. "She's not here." Helen cursed under her breath and hurried away. I allowed myself a moment of relief before reality set in. They knew I was gone. I had to move now. I burst out of the closet and ran for the door, fumbling with the lock. Just as I got it open, a hand grabbed my shoulder, spinning me around. Adam's face was contorted with rage. "Where do you think you're going?" I didn't think. I just reacted. My knee came up hard, connecting with his groin. As he doubled over in pain, I shoved him aside and bolted out the door. The cool night air hit my face as I ran down the driveway. I could hear Helen screaming behind me, but I didn't look back. I just ran, my bare feet slapping against the pavement, my lungs burning with each breath. I didn't stop until I reached the end of the street. Gasping for air, I finally allowed myself to look back. The house loomed in the distance, dark and menacing, but there was no sign of Adam or Helen pursuing me. My hands shook as I pulled out my phone, dialing my parents' number. "Dad," I choked out when he answered. "I need help. Please come get me." As I waited for my parents to arrive, huddled in the shadows of a neighbor's hedge, the full impact of what had happened hit me. The life I thought I knew was a lie. My husband and mother-in-law had not only abused me, but had been planning to kill me. Tears streamed down my face, a mix of fear, relief, and overwhelming grief. But beneath it all, a steely resolve was forming. I had escaped, but this wasn't over. Adam and Helen needed to pay for what they'd done. As my parents' car pulled up, I made a decision. I would not be a victim anymore. It was time to fight back, to reclaim my life, and ensure that Adam and Helen could never hurt anyone else again. With renewed determination, I stood up, ready to face whatever came next. The battle for my freedom and my life had only just begun. The law office felt like a fortress, a sanctuary from the storm raging outside. I sat across from Linda Pearson, the divorce attorney my parents had recommended, my hands clasped tightly in my lap to stop them from shaking. "Sarah," Linda said, her voice gentle but firm, "I want you to understand that what we're about to do won't be easy. Adam and Helen won't go down without a fight." I nodded, swallowing hard. "I know, but I can't let them win, not after everything they've done." Linda spread out the documents before me, police reports, medical records, and transcripts of the recordings we'd made. Seeing it all laid out like this, the full extent of the abuse I'd endured hit me anew. "We have a strong case," Linda assured me. The evidence of emotional and physical abuse is overwhelming. And with the attempted drugging and, well, what sounds like a murder plot, we can push for criminal charges as well. My stomach churned at her words. It still seemed surreal that my own husband had been planning to kill me, but the fear that gripped me was all too real. What if they come after me? I whispered, voicing the fear that had haunted me since my escape. Linda's eyes hardened. That's why we're filing for an emergency restraining order along with the divorce papers. They won't be able to come near you without facing serious consequences. As I signed paper after paper, a mix of emotions washed over me. Relief, fear, anger, and a glimmer of hope. This was it. I was finally taking back control of my life. The next few weeks passed in a blur of legal meetings, therapy sessions, and sleepless nights. Adam and Helen, true to form, fought the divorce with everything they had. They denied all allegations, painting me as mentally unstable and ungrateful. But I refused to back down. With each deposition, each piece of evidence presented, I grew stronger. The recordings we'd made were damning, and several neighbors came forward with accounts of hearing arguments and seeing bruises on me. Then, just as it seemed we were making progress, disaster struck. I was leaving my therapist's office when I saw him, Adam, leaning against my car, his face a mask of false concern. "Sarah," he called out, taking a step towards me. "Please, we need to talk. This has all gotten out of hand." I froze, my heart pounding. He wasn't supposed to be here. The restraining order. "Stay back," I warned, fumbling for my phone. "I'm calling the police." Adam's face darkened. "You ungrateful bitch," he snarled, lunging forward. I turned to run, but he caught my arm, spinning me around. The familiar fear threatened to paralyze me, but something inside me snapped. I was done being a victim. With all my strength, I shoved him away. "No," I shouted, my voice echoing in the parking lot. "You don't get to control me anymore." Adam stumbled back, shock written across his face. For a moment, we stood there, staring at each other. Then the sound of sirens broke the silence. As the police car pulled into the lot, Adam's expression changed from shock to fury. "This isn't over," he hissed before turning and running. I collapsed against my car, shaking uncontrollably as the officers approached. In the chaos that followed, giving statements calling Linda and my parents, one thought kept running through my mind. Adam was right. This wasn't over. That night, as I lay in bed at my parents' house, surrounded by the comfort of my childhood room, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread. Adam's words echoed in my mind, a sinister promise of things to come. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. With trembling fingers, I opened it. "You can't hide forever, Sarah. One way or another, I'll make you pay for this." I stared at the screen, a cold fear gripping my heart. Adam had found a way around the restraining order, a way to reach me. And I knew, with chilling certainty, that he wouldn't stop until he had his revenge. As I called the police to report the threat, I realized that the real battle was just beginning. The divorce, the legal proceedings, they were just the opening salvo. The true test of my strength and resilience lay ahead. Tomorrow, I would face Adam and Helen in court for the first time since filing for divorce. And I knew, deep in my bones, that it would be the fight of my life. The courthouse loomed before me, its stone facade a silent witness to countless battles. Today, it would bear witness to mine. I took a deep breath, steadying myself as I climbed the steps, my parents and Linda flanking me like protective sentries. "Remember," Linda whispered as we approached the courtroom, "stay calm. No matter what they say, we have the truth on our side." I nodded, squaring my shoulders. The truth. It had become my armor, my weapon against the lies that had imprisoned me for so long. As we entered the courtroom, I saw them. Adam and Helen, sitting with their lawyer, looking every inch the concerned husband and mother-in-law. The sight of them made my stomach churn, but I refused to let them see my fear. The judge called the court to order, and the battle began. Adam's lawyer painted a picture of me as an unstable, ungrateful wife, twisting my amnesia into a sign of mental instability. Helen dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief, the perfect image of a distraught mother. But then it was our turn. Linda presented the evidence methodically, relentlessly, the recordings, the medical reports, the testimonies from neighbors and co-workers. With each piece of evidence, I could see Adam and Helen's facades cracking. When it was time for me to testify, I felt a sudden calm wash over me. This was my moment to reclaim my voice, my truth. "Sarah," Linda began, "can you tell the court about your life with Adam and Helen?" I took a deep breath and began to speak. I told them everything. The constant criticism, the isolation, the fear that had become my constant companion. As I spoke, I could feel the weight of those years lifting from my shoulders. "And the night you left," Linda prompted. "What happened?" I recounted that terrifying night, my voice growing stronger with each word. "They drugged me," I said, looking directly at Adam and Helen. "And I heard them planning to make my death look like an accident." A gasp rippled through the courtroom. Adam's face contorted with rage, while Helen's mask of concern slipped, revealing the cold calculation beneath. As I finished my testimony, Adam suddenly leapt to his feet. "She's lying," he shouted, his face red with fury. "You ungrateful bitch, after everything we've done for you." The judge banged his gavel, calling for order, but Adam was beyond control. He lunged towards me, his eyes wild with hatred. Everything seemed to slow down. I saw the bailiff moving to intercept Adam, my father rising from his seat, Linda's hand on my arm. But in that moment I didn't flinch. I stood my ground, meeting Adam's gaze without fear. "No more," I said, my voice ringing clear through the chaos. "You don't control me anymore." Adam froze, shock replacing the rage in his eyes. In that moment I saw him for what he truly was, a small, pathetic man whose power existed only through fear and manipulation. The bailiff restrained Adam, and the judge called for a recess. As Adam was led away, still shouting threats, I felt a strange sense of calm. The storm I had feared for so long had finally broken, and I was still standing. During the recess, Linda pulled me aside, her face grave. "Sarah, Adam's outburst might have just won our case, but it's also made him more dangerous. We need to be prepared for anything." I nodded, the reality of the situation sinking in. This wasn't just about winning in court anymore. It was about survival. As we prepared to re-enter the courtroom, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "This isn't over. One way or another, you'll pay." I showed the message to Linda and my parents. Their faces paled, but I felt a steely resolve settle over me. Adam was right about one thing. This wasn't over. But I was done being the victim in this story. "Let's finish this," I said, squaring my shoulders and pushing open the courtroom doors. As I walked back to the stand, I could feel Adam's eyes boring into me, promising retribution. But for the first time, his gaze didn't fill me with fear. Instead, I felt a fierce determination. Whatever came next, whatever Adam had planned, I would face it. Because I had finally found something stronger than fear, the power of my own voice and the truth it carried. The judge called the court back to order, and I took my seat, ready for whatever came next. The final battle was about to begin, and this time I intended to win. The envelope felt heavy in my hands, its contents carrying the weight of my past and the promise of my future. I took a deep breath and opened it, my eyes scanning the official document inside. Divorce granted. It was over. A wave of emotions washed over me, relief, joy, and a hint of sadness for the life I'd once dreamed of. But mostly, I felt free. "Sarah," my mom's voice called from downstairs, "there's someone here to see you." Curious, I made my way down, the divorce papers still clutched in my hand. As I reached the bottom of the stairs, I froze. Helen stood in the entryway looking smaller and older than I remembered. "Hello, Sarah," she said, her voice lacking its usual sharpness. I came to apologize." For a moment I couldn't speak. After everything that had happened, all the pain and fear, here she was, standing in my parents' house. "Why now?" I finally managed to ask. Helen's eyes filled with tears. "I've lost everything. Adam, he's in jail. The truth about what we did to you, it destroyed our family. And I realized too late that I was the architect of that destruction." I listened as Helen poured out her regrets, her realization of the toxic environment she'd created, the way she'd enabled and encouraged Adam's abuse. It was surreal, hearing the woman who had tormented me for years admit to her wrongs. When she finished, silence hung between us. I thought about all the times I dreamed of this moment, imagined what I'd say if Helen ever apologized. But now, faced with the reality, I felt nothing. No anger, no satisfaction, just a calm certainty. "Thank you for your apology, Helen," I said, my voice steady. "I hope you find peace, but I can't be part of your journey to find it. Goodbye." As I closed the door behind her, I felt the last chains of my past fall away. I was truly free now. Not just legally, but emotionally. The next few months were a whirlwind of change and growth. I reconnected with old friends, started traveling, and discovered new passions I'd never had the freedom to explore before. With each new experience, I felt myself growing stronger, more confident. But something was still missing. I found myself thinking about other women who might be trapped in situations like mine, feeling alone and helpless. That's when I decided to start the support group. Our first meeting was small, just 5 women gathered in a community center room. As I shared my story, I saw recognition and hope dawn in their eyes. For the first time, they realized they weren't alone. Week by week, our group grew. Women from all walks of life, each with their own story of survival. Together, we laughed, cried, and slowly, steadily began to heal. One evening, as I was locking up after a particularly powerful session, a young woman approached me. Her eyes were red from crying, but there was a determined set to her jaw. "I'm leaving him," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "After hearing your story, I know I can do it. Thank you for showing me it's possible." In that moment, I felt a warmth spread through my chest. This was why I'd survived, why I'd fought so hard. Not just for myself, but for her, and for all the others who needed to know they weren't alone. As I drove home that night, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. The pain, the fear, the moments of despair, but also the strength I'd found, the support I'd received, and the new purpose I'd discovered. I pulled into my driveway, my own home, bought with my own money, filled with my own choices. As I stepped inside, I caught a glimpse of myself in the hallway mirror. The woman looking back at me was strong, confident, and free. I smiled at my reflection, feeling a deep sense of peace settle over me. My past no longer defined me. I had reclaimed my identity, my voice, my life. And now I was using that voice to help others do the same. This wasn't just a new chapter in my life. It was a whole new book, and I was the author. Whatever challenges lay ahead, I knew I had the strength to face them, because I had faced my darkest fears and emerged victorious. As I settled into my favorite chair, I opened my laptop and began to type. "My name is Sarah," I wrote, "and this is my story of survival, hope, and the power of finding your own voice." The cursor blinked, waiting for the words to flow, and flow they did, carrying with them the promise of healing, not just for me, but for all those who would read them and find the courage to write their own new beginnings. The room spun like a carnival ride gone wrong. I clutched the kitchen counter, my knuckles white as the familiar dizziness threatened to overwhelm me. "Not again, not now." "Scott?" I called out, my voice barely above a whisper. Silence. Then, heavy footsteps from upstairs. My husband appeared in the doorway, his face a mask of irritation rather than concern. "What is it now, Lena?" he sighed, not moving to help me. I swallowed hard, fighting the nausea. "I think I'm going to faint. Can you just help me to the couch?" Scott rolled his eyes, but crossed the room, roughly grabbing my arm. "This is getting old, you know. Have you even been to the doctor like I told you to?" As he half-dragged me to the living room, I bit back a retort. Of course I had been to the doctor, multiple times, but no one could figure out what was wrong with me. The dizziness, the fatigue, the unexplained pain, it was all a mystery. He dumped me unceremoniously onto the couch and stood there, arms crossed. "I have a meeting in an hour. Are you going to be okay? Or do I need to cancel?" I looked up at him, searching for any hint of the man I'd married 10 years ago. The Scott who would have dropped everything to take care of me. The Scott who loved me. "I'll be fine," I lied, closing my eyes against another wave of dizziness. "Go to your meeting." "Great," he said, already turning away. "There's leftover pizza in the fridge if you get hungry later." As the front door slammed behind him, I let out a shaky breath. When had things gotten so bad between us? I thought back to our early days. The romantic gestures, the laughter, the way he'd look at me like I was the only woman in the world. Now, I was lucky if he looked at me at all. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. With shaking hands, I reached for it, hoping it wasn't work calling to ask why I hadn't shown up yet. It was a text from my father-in-law, Frank. "Hey, sweetie, just checking in. How are you feeling today?" I smiled weakly. At least someone cared. "Not great," I typed back. "Another dizzy spell. Scott's gone to a meeting. Frank's response was almost immediate. Want me to come over? I can bring soup. Tears pricked at my eyes. That would be wonderful, thank you. As I waited for Frank to arrive, I couldn't help but wonder what Scott's mother, Beth, would think if she could see us now. She had been so warm, so loving, the complete opposite of her son. Her death 5 years ago had hit us all hard, but sometimes I felt like I was the only one who still mourned her. A knock at the door pulled me from my thoughts. "It's open, Frank," I called out. He entered, a thermos of soup in one hand and a concerned smile on his face. "Oh, Lena," he said, taking in my pale complexion. "You look awful, sweetheart." "Thanks," I said dryly, managing a weak laugh. As Frank busied himself in the kitchen, heating up the soup, I closed my eyes again. The dizziness was subsiding, but a nagging thought remained. Why hadn't Scott told his father he was going to a meeting? And why did Frank seem surprised to find me alone? "Here we go," Frank said, returning with a steaming bowl. "Chicken noodle, Beth's recipe. It'll fix you right up." I took a small sip, savoring the familiar taste. "Frank," I said hesitantly, "did Scott tell you he had a meeting today?" Frank's brow furrowed. "No, he didn't mention anything." "Why?" I shook my head, trying to dispel the growing unease. "No reason. I'm sure he just forgot." But as I ate my soup, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very, very wrong, and for the first time I allowed myself to wonder, what if my illness wasn't the only thing threatening to tear my marriage apart? The next morning I woke to an empty bed and a pounding headache. Scott's side hadn't been slept in. Again. I reached for my phone, squinting at the bright screen. No messages, no missed calls, nothing. I dragged myself out of bed, ignoring the wave of dizziness that threatened to send me back down. As I made my way to the kitchen, I heard the front door open. "Scott?" I called out. He appeared in the doorway, looking disheveled and smelling faintly of alcohol. "Oh, you're up," he said, not meeting my eyes. "Where were you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Work thing," he mumbled, heading for the stairs. "Crashed at Dave's. Going to shower." Before I could respond, he was gone. I stood there, my hands shaking as I gripped the kitchen counter. Work thing? On a Tuesday night? And since when did he stay at Dave's without letting me know? The lies were piling up, each one more transparent than the last. I couldn't ignore it anymore. Something was very wrong with my marriage. I pulled out my laptop, determination overriding my physical discomfort. If Scott wasn't going to be honest with me, I'd find the truth myself. Hours passed as I combed through our joint bank statements, Scott's email, he'd never been good with passwords, and his social media accounts. At first, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Then I noticed a pattern. Every other Friday there was a charge at a high-end restaurant downtown, a restaurant Scott had never mentioned going to, and always for two. My heart raced as I dug deeper. There were Uber receipts to and from an unfamiliar address, hotel charges in cities where Scott claimed to be at conferences, and buried in his email drafts I found messages to someone named Maggie. Intimate messages, loving messages, messages that should have been for me. I was so engrossed in my discovery that I didn't hear Scott come back downstairs. His voice made me jump. "What are you doing?" I slammed the laptop shut, my cheeks burning with a mix of shame and anger. "Nothing," I lied, hating how easily it came. "Just work stuff." Scott's eyes narrowed, but he didn't push it. "I'm heading out again. Don't wait up." As he turned to leave, something inside me snapped. "Are you seeing someone else?" The words hung in the air between us, heavy and accusatory. Scott froze, his hand on the doorknob. "What?" he said, his voice dangerously low. I stood up, ignoring the trembling in my legs. "You heard me. Are you cheating on me, Scott?" He turned to face me, his expression a mixture of anger and... Was that guilt? "You're being ridiculous, Lena. Is this because of your... condition? Are you not thinking straight?" The casual dismissal of my illness stung, but I pressed on. "Don't turn this around on me. Answer the question." Scott's jaw clenched. "I don't have time for this. I have a life outside of babysitting you, you know." "Babysitting me?" I echoed, incredulous. "Is that what you think our marriage is?" He ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in every movement. "Look, I can't do this right now. We'll talk later." And just like that, he was gone, leaving me alone with my suspicions and a growing sense of dread. I sank back up onto the couch, my mind reeling. Scott hadn't denied it. He hadn't even tried to reassure me. And his reaction, it was all the confirmation I needed. My phone buzzed, startling me out of my thoughts. It was a text from Frank. Hey, sweetie, just checking in. Scott mentioned you weren't feeling well. Need anything? I stared at the message, a plan forming in my mind. If Scott was going to lie to me, two could play at that game. Actually, I typed back, my fingers shaking slightly, I could use some company, and maybe some advice. As I hit send, I knew there was no going back. Whatever happened next, my life and my marriage would never be the same. Frank arrived within the hour, his kind face etched with concern. I hadn't realized how desperately I needed a friendly presence until I saw him standing in my doorway. Lena, sweetheart, he said, enveloping me in a warm hug. What's going on? I led him to the living room, my hands shaking as I poured us both a cup of tea. Frank, I think Scott's cheating on me. The words hung in the air, heavy and final. Frank's face went through a range of emotions, shock, disbelief, and then a slow, simmering anger. What makes you think that? He asked, his voice carefully controlled. I told him everything, the late nights, the mysterious charges, the emails to Maggie. With each revelation, Frank's expression darkened. I can't believe it, he muttered, shaking his head. Scott, my own son. There's more, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I overheard him on the phone yesterday. He's planning a trip to the Pacific Islands. With you and Carol. Frank's brow furrowed. What? We're not planning any trip. The realization hit us both at the same time. Scott was using his parents as a cover for a romantic getaway with his mistress. Oh, Lena, Frank said, reaching out to squeeze my hand. I'm so sorry. I had no idea. I nodded, fighting back tears. What do I do, Frank? I feel so lost. Before he could answer, the front door opened. Scott walked in, stopping short when he saw us. Dad, he said, surprise evident in his voice. What are you doing here? Frank stood up, his normally gentle demeanor replaced by something harder. I think we need to have a talk, son. Scott's eyes darted between us, realization dawning. Lena, he said, his voice low and dangerous. What have you been saying? I stood up, my legs shaky, but my resolve firm. Only the truth, Scott, something you seem to have forgotten how to tell. You don't know what you're talking about, Scott snapped. Dad, whatever she's told you. Is it true? Frank interrupted. Are you having an affair? The silence that followed was deafening. Scott's face went through a range of emotions, anger, guilt, defiance. It's complicated, he finally said. Frank's disappointment was palpable. I raised you better than this, Scott. You don't understand, Scott argued. Lena's always sick, always needing something. I can't live like this anymore. His words cut through me like a knife. I stumbled back, gripping the couch for support. If that's how you feel, I said, my voice surprisingly steady, then maybe we shouldn't be married anymore. Scott's eyes widened. What? You heard me, I continued, a strange calm settling over me. I want a divorce. The room fell silent. Frank looked between us, his face a mixture of sadness and resolve. I think that might be for the best, he said quietly. Scott, I think you should leave, now. For a moment I thought Scott might argue. But then his shoulders slumped in defeat. Without another word, he turned and walked out the door. As soon as it closed behind him, my legs gave out. I sank onto the couch, my whole body shaking. Oh, sweetheart, Frank said, sitting next to me and pulling me into a hug. It's going to be okay. We'll get through this. I nodded against his shoulder, too overwhelmed to speak. As the reality of what had just happened washed over me, a strange mix of grief and relief flooded through me. My marriage was over. The life I had built with Scott was crumbling around me. But for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. As Frank held me, murmuring words of comfort, I made a silent vow to myself. No matter what happened next, I would survive this. I would rebuild my life, stronger and happier than before. And Scott? Well, he would soon learn that actions have consequences. And I had a feeling his were just beginning. The days following my confrontation with Scott blurred together in a haze of grief and determination. I'd moved into the spare bedroom, our interactions limited to tense, monosyllabic exchanges. But I wasn't done. Not by a long shot. With shaking hands, I logged into Scott's email account again. I knew it was wrong, but I needed answers. I needed proof. And there it was, staring me in the face. An email confirmation for 2 round-trip tickets to Bora Bora. Not in Scott's name, but in the name of his parents. My heart pounded as I read the dates. They matched perfectly with the business trip Scott had mentioned last week. I dug deeper, my stomach churning with each new discovery. There were dozens of emails between Scott and someone named Maggie. Sweet nothings, plans for their future, complaints about me. It was all there, laid bare in black and white. But it was the photos that broke me. Scott and a beautiful blonde woman wrapped in each other's arms on various beaches, in hotel rooms, at romantic restaurants. The timestamps showed a relationship spanning months, maybe even years. I barely made it to the bathroom before I was violently ill. Hours later, I sat on the cold tile floor, my back against the bathtub, when I heard the front door open. "Lena?" Scott called out. "Are you home?" I didn't answer. I couldn't find my voice. His footsteps approached the bathroom. "Lena, are you okay?" The concern in his voice made me want to scream. How dare he pretend to care now? I looked up as he appeared in the doorway, his eyes widening at the sight of me. "Jesus, Lena, what happened?" "Maggie happened," I said, my voice hoarse. Bora Bora happened. Your entire double life happened, Scott." The color drained from his face. "What are you talking about?" I laughed, a hollow, bitter sound. Just don't. I've seen everything. The emails, the photos, the trip you booked under your parents' names. It's over, Scott. No more lies." He slumped against the doorframe, defeat written across his features. "Lena, Save it," I interrupted, forcing myself to stand. "I don't want to hear your excuses. I want you out. Now." Scott's expression hardened. "You can't just kick me out. This is my house, too." "Is it?" I countered, a surge of anger giving me strength. "Because from what I've seen, you've been living a whole other life with Maggie. So go live it, but not here." He stepped towards me, his voice low and dangerous. "You're making a big mistake, Lena. You're sick. You need me." I stood my ground, even as my legs threatened to give out. "No, Scott. The biggest mistake I ever made was marrying you, and I'm not as helpless as you think." We stood there, locked in a silent battle of wills. Finally, Scott turned away. "Fine," he spat. "I'll go. But this isn't over." I watched as he stormed out, listening to the sounds of drawers being yanked open and clothes being thrown into bags. When the front door slammed shut, I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. Trembling, I made my way to the living room and picked up my phone. I had decisions to make, and I couldn't do it alone. "Frank?" I said when he answered. "I need your help. It's worse than we thought." As I filled Frank in on everything I'd discovered, a strange calm settled over me. The worst had happened. My marriage was over, my trust shattered. But for the first time in years, I felt a glimmer of something I'd almost forgotten: hope. Whatever came next, I would face it head on. Scott and Maggie could have their fantasy life in Bora Bora. I was about to start a new chapter of my own, one where I called the shots. And God help anyone who tried to stand in my way. The shrill ring of my phone jolted me awake. I fumbled for it in the darkness, my heart racing. Late-night calls were never good news. "Hello?" I answered, my voice thick with sleep. "Lena?" It was Frank, and he sounded devastated. "It's Beth. She's gone." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Beth, my mother-in-law, the woman who had been more of a mother to me than my own, was dead. I struggled to breathe, to comprehend. "What happened?" I managed to choke out. "Heart attack," Frank said, his voice breaking. "It was so sudden. We were just having dinner and—" I closed my eyes, fighting back tears. "I'll be right there, Frank. Just hold on." As I hung up, I realized with a start that Scott wasn't home. Of course he wasn't. He was probably with Maggie, blissfully unaware that his mother had just died. I dressed quickly, my hands shaking as I dialed Scott's number. Straight to voicemail. I left a message, my voice trembling. "Scott, it's your mother. She's gone. Call me back immediately." The drive to Frank and Beth's house was a blur. When I arrived, the sight of the ambulance in the driveway made it all too real. Frank was sitting on the porch steps, looking lost and broken. I rushed to him, wrapping my arms around his shaking form. "Oh, Frank, I'm so sorry." He clung to me like a lifeline. "She was fine, Lena. We were laughing about something on TV, and then she just collapsed." Over the next few hours, I handled everything. I spoke with the paramedics, called the funeral home, and tried Scott's phone countless times. Each unanswered call fueled a growing rage inside me. As dawn broke, I was sitting with Frank at the kitchen table, both of us clutching mugs of cold coffee, when my phone finally rang. It was Scott. "Lena? What's going on? I just got your messages." The casual tone of his voice made my blood boil. "Where the hell have you been?" I hissed, stepping outside so Frank wouldn't hear. "Your mother is dead, Scott. dead and you've been unreachable for hours." There was a long pause. "What? No, that can't be right." "It is right," I snapped. "She had a heart attack last night. Your father has been devastated, and I've been here alone, handling everything. Where are you?" I'm out of town," he stammered. "On business. I told you." "Save it," I interrupted. "I know exactly where you are and who you're with. But right now, that doesn't matter. What matters is that you get your ass back here immediately. Your father needs you." I hung up before he could respond, my hands shaking with anger and grief. The next few days passed in a whirlwind of funeral arrangements and condolence calls. Scott returned, looking sheepish and guilty, but I couldn't bring myself to confront him. Not yet. Beth deserved better than that. The morning of the funeral dawned bright and clear, a stark contrast to the somber mood. As I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting my black dress, a wave of determination washed over me. Beth had always encouraged me to stand up for myself, to be strong. She wouldn't have wanted me to live like this, in a marriage built on lies and betrayal. I looked at my reflection, really looked, for the first time in years. The woman staring back at me was tired, yes, but there was a fire in her eyes that I hadn't seen in a long time. In that moment, I made a decision. After the funeral, after we'd paid our respects to Beth, I would confront Scott. I would expose his lies, not just to him, but to everyone. It was time for the truth to come out. And I was ready to be the one to tell it. With one last deep breath, I turned away from the mirror and headed downstairs. I had a funeral to attend, a husband to confront, and a life to reclaim. Beth would have been proud. The church was packed, a sea of black-clad mourners paying their respects to Beth. I stood at the front next to Frank, my hand on his trembling shoulder. Scott was conspicuously absent. Just as the minister began to speak, the church doors burst open. Scott stumbled in, his suit rumpled, his eyes bloodshot. The congregation turned to stare as he made his way down the aisle. "Sorry I'm late," he mumbled, sliding into the pew next to me. The smell of alcohol on his breath made me recoil. Frank leaned over, his voice a harsh whisper. "Where the hell have you been?" Scott ignored him, his gaze fixed straight ahead. I clenched my fists, willing myself to stay calm. This wasn't the time or place. But as the service continued, my resolve began to crumble. When it came time for Scott to deliver the eulogy, he stumbled to the podium. I held my breath, praying he wouldn't embarrass himself or dishonor Beth's memory. "My mother," he began, his words slurring slightly, "was a saint. She put up with so much from all of us, especially me." I saw Frank stiffen beside me. Scott continued, his voice growing louder. "She always told me to be honest, to face my mistakes, so that's what I'm going to do now." My heart raced. Surely he wouldn't. "I've been lying to everyone," Scott announced, his eyes wild. "To my wife, to my father, to all of you, I've been having an affair?" A collective gasp rippled through the church. Frank grabbed my hand, squeezing it tightly. "Her name is Maggie," Scott continued, oblivious to the shock around him. "And I love her. I'm sorry, Lena. I'm sorry, Dad. I'm sorry, Mom." He stumbled back from the podium, nearly falling. In that moment, something inside me snapped. I stood up, my voice ringing out clear and strong. "No, Scott, you don't get to do this. Not here. Not now." All eyes turned to me as I made my way to the front of the church. My legs were shaking, but my resolve was iron. "Beth was a wonderful woman," I began, looking out at the stunned faces. "She taught me about strength, about dignity, about standing up for myself. And that's what I'm doing now." I turned to face Scott, who was staring at me with a mixture of shock and fear. "I've known about your affair for weeks," I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. "I've seen the emails, the photos, the trip you planned to Bora Bora under your parents' names. While Beth was dying, while I was planning her funeral, you were with her." The church was dead silent. I could feel the weight of everyone's stares, but I didn't care. "Beth deserved better than this," I continued. "She deserved a son who honored her, who lived up to the values she taught. And I deserve better, too." I turned back to the congregation, my chin held high. "I'm sorry you all had to witness this. Beth would have hated the drama, but she also would have wanted the truth to come out. So here it is. My marriage is over, and I'm finally okay with that." With those words, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. I walked back to my seat, ignoring Scott's attempts to grab my arm. Frank stood up, his face a mask of fury. "Get out," he said to Scott, his voice low and dangerous. "Now." As Scott stumbled out of the church, leaving a wake of whispers behind him, I sat there, my heart pounding. I'd done it. I'd finally stood up for myself, for Beth, for the truth. The rest of the service passed in a blur. As we filed out of the church afterwards, I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was Frank. "Beth would have been proud of you," he said, his eyes glistening with tears. "I know I am." I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. As we walked out into the sunlight, I realized that this wasn't just the end of Beth's life. It was the end of my old life, too. And for the first time in years, I was ready to see what the future held. The weeks following Beth's funeral were a whirlwind of legal meetings, hushed phone calls, and sidelong glances from neighbors. I'd become the talk of the town, but for once, I didn't care. I was too busy reclaiming my life. I sat in my lawyer's office reviewing the divorce papers. The door burst open, and Scott stormed in, his face flushed with anger. "You can't do this to me, Lena," he snarled. "You're ruining everything." I met his gaze steadily. "No, Scott, you did that all on your own." My lawyer, a stern woman named Patricia, stood up. "Mr. Thompson, you weren't invited to this meeting. I'll have to ask you to leave." Scott ignored her, his eyes wild. "I've lost my job because of you. The firm says I'm a liability now. Do you have any idea what you've done?" A twinge of satisfaction coursed through me. "Actions have consequences, Scott. You made your choices." He slammed his fist on the desk, making me flinch. "You vindictive bitch. You've turned everyone against me. Even my own father won't speak to me." Patricia reached for the phone. "I'm calling security." "Don't bother," I said, standing up. "I'm leaving. We're done here anyway." As I walked out, Scott grabbed my arm. "This isn't over, Lena. You'll regret this." I yanked my arm away, my voice low and dangerous. "Touch me again, and you'll regret it. We're through, Scott. Accept it and move on." I left him standing there, shaking with rage. As I drove home, my phone buzzed incessantly with messages from friends and family, all expressing their support. But one message made me pause. It was from Maggie. "We need to talk. Meet me at the park, 3 p.m. My heart raced. What could she possibly want? Against my better judgment, I found myself driving to the park at the appointed time. Maggie was sitting on a bench, her perfect blonde hair windswept, her eyes red-rimmed. She looked up as I approached. "Lena," she said, her voice trembling. "I'm so sorry, for everything." I sat down beside her, keeping my distance. "Why did you want to meet?" She took a deep breath. "Scott? He's not who we thought he was. He's been lying to both of us." My stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" "He never intended to leave you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He was just using me, and now I'm pregnant." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. I gripped the bench, trying to steady myself. "Does he know?" I managed to ask. Maggie nodded, tears streaming down her face. "He told me to get rid of it, said it would ruin everything. When I refused, he threatened me." A cold fury washed over me. "That bastard," I hissed. "I didn't know where else to turn," Maggie said, her voice breaking. "You're the only one who understands what he's really like." In that moment, looking at this broken woman who had once been my rival, I made a decision that would change everything. "Listen to me, Maggie," I said, taking her hand. "We're going to get through this, together." Her eyes widened in surprise. "You'd help me? After everything?" I nodded, a grim smile on my face. "Scott hurt us both. It's time we fought back." As we sat there, two unlikely allies united against a common enemy, I felt a surge of determination. Scott thought he could manipulate and threaten his way out of this mess. He was about to learn how wrong he was. I pulled out my phone, dialing a familiar number. "Frank, it's Lena. We need to talk. It's about Scott, and it's worse than we thought." As I hung up, I turned to Maggie. "Are you ready for this?" She nodded, a spark of defiance in her eyes. "Let's take him down." In that moment, I knew we were on the brink of something big. The final battle was about to begin, and this time, I wasn't going to lose. 5 years. It's been 5 years since that day in the park with Maggie. 5 years since we decided to take a stand against Scott. And what a journey it's been. I sit on my porch, sipping tea and watching the sunset. The sound of laughter drifts from inside the house, Jake playing with Maggie's daughter, Emma. It's a sound that never fails to warm my heart. The doorbell rings, and I know who it is before I even answer. Frank, his hair now completely gray but his eyes as kind as ever, stands on the doorstep with a bouquet of flowers. "Happy birthday, Lena," he says, pulling me into a hug. As we settle in the living room, Jake joins us, Emma perched on his hip. The sight of them together still amazes me sometimes. After everything that happened with Scott, I never thought I'd trust again, let alone find love. But Jake, he's different. He understands my health struggles, supports me through the bad days, and celebrates the good ones. "So," Frank says, a mischievous glint in his eye, "have you heard the latest about Scott?" I shake my head. After the dust settled from our legal battle, where Maggie and I exposed not just his infidelity, but his financial fraud and threats, I'd made a point of not keeping tabs on my ex-husband. "Apparently, he's working as a night janitor at his old firm," Frank chuckles. Quite a fall from grace for the former hotshot lawyer. Part of me wants to feel satisfied to revel in Scott's downfall, but mostly I just feel nothing. The anger, the hurt, the desire for revenge, it's all faded away, replaced by a peace I never thought I'd find. "You know," I say, bouncing Emma on my knee, "I almost feel sorry for him." Jake raises an eyebrow. "Really? After everything he put you through?" I nod slowly. Don't get me wrong, he deserves the consequences of his actions, but living with that much bitterness and regret, it must be exhausting. Frank reaches out and squeezes my hand. "Beth would be so proud of you, Lena. You've grown so much." His words bring tears to my eyes. Beth had always believed in me, even when I didn't believe in myself. I like to think she's watching over us, smiling at the family we've created. As the evening wears on, filled with laughter and love, I find myself reflecting on the journey that brought me here. The pain, the betrayal, the fight to reclaim my life, it all led to this moment. Later, as Jake and I get ready for bed, he wraps his arms around me from behind, meeting my eyes in the mirror. "You okay?" he asks softly. "You seemed lost in thought earlier." I turn in his arms, resting my head on his chest. "I was just thinking about how far I've come, how different my life is now." He kisses the top of my head. "You're the strongest person I know, Lena. You took a horrible situation and turned it into something beautiful." As we climb into bed, I feel a sense of contentment wash over me. My health may still have its ups and downs, but I'm no longer defined by my illness or by what Scott did to me. I'm defined by my resilience, by the love I give and receive, by the family I've chosen. I think about Maggie and Emma, living in their own apartment nearby, building a life free from Scott's shadow. I think about Frank, who became more of a father to me than ever before. And I think about Jake, who loves me unconditionally, who sees my strength even on my weakest days. As I drift off to sleep, I realize something profound. The revenge I once craved, the justice I fought so hard for, it wasn't about making Scott suffer. It was about reclaiming my own power, about proving to myself that I could overcome anything. And I did. I survived. I thrived. And now, surrounded by love and peace, I can finally say I won, not because Scott lost, but because I found myself. And that, more than anything, is the sweetest victory of all. The letter trembled in my hands, its crisp edges suddenly feeling like razor blades against my skin. I read the words again, hoping they'd somehow rearrange themselves into something less devastating. They didn't. "Richard, my love," it began. My husband's name, followed by an endearment that wasn't mine to give. I sank onto the edge of our bed. The same bed where Richard and I had made love, shared dreams, and created our beautiful daughter, Lily. Now it felt tainted, as if the secrets hidden within its folds were seeping out to suffocate me. A knock at the door jolted me from my spiral. "Mom?" Lily's voice called out. "Are you okay?" I hastily shoved the letter under a pillow and tried to compose myself. "Come in, sweetie," I managed, forcing a smile as she entered. Lily, all gangly limbs and curious eyes at 14, hesitated in the doorway. "Dad said he's working late again tonight. Can we order pizza?" The mention of Richard sent a fresh wave of nausea through me, but I nodded. "Sure, honey. Why don't you go ahead and call? Get whatever toppings you want." As Lily bounced away, phone already in hand, I retrieved the letter. My fingers itched to tear it to shreds, to burn it and pretend I'd never seen it. But I couldn't. This was evidence, proof of the growing chasm in my marriage that I'd been trying so hard to ignore. I made my way downstairs, letter tucked safely in my pocket. In the kitchen, Lily was chattering away about her day, but her words barely registered. My mind was a whirlwind of questions and accusations. "Mom?" Lily's voice cut through my thoughts. "You're not listening." I blinked, focusing on her concerned face. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. I've got a lot on my mind. What were you saying?" She sighed dramatically, in that way only teenagers can. "I was asking if we could invite Grandma over this weekend. Dad's going to be out of town again, and I thought it might be fun." My mother, Grace. The thought of her steady presence was suddenly overwhelmingly appealing. "That's a great idea, Lily. Why don't you give her a call after we eat?" As if on cue, the doorbell rang, announcing the arrival of our dinner. We settled at the table, the normalcy of our routine a stark contrast to the turmoil inside me. "So where's Dad going this time?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. Lily shrugged, mouthful of pizza. "Dunno, some conference thing, I think. He was being all weird about it when I asked." My heart clenched. How long had this been going on? How many conferences had really been rendezvous with his mistress? "Mom?" Lily's voice was small now. "Is everything okay with you and Dad?" I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the worry etched in her young face. She was perceptive, my girl. Too perceptive sometimes. "We're just going through a rough patch, sweetie," I said, reaching out to squeeze her hand. "But don't worry. We'll figure it out." The lie tasted bitter on my tongue, but I couldn't bring myself to shatter her world. Not yet. After dinner, as Lily chattered away on the phone with her grandmother, I retreated to my home office. The letter felt like it was burning a hole in my pocket. I pulled it out, smoothing the creases, and began to read it again, this time looking for clues. The sound of the front door opening made me jump. Richard's voice called out, "I'm home!" Panic surged through me. I wasn't ready to face him, wasn't prepared for the confrontation that was inevitably coming. But as his footsteps approached my office, I knew I had no choice. The door swung open, and there he stood, my husband of 16 years, the father of my child, the man I thought I knew better than anyone in the world. "Sophia," he said, his brow furrowing as he took in my expression. "What's wrong?" I held up the letter, watching as recognition and then fear flashed across his face. "We need to talk, Richard," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Right now." Richard's face drained of color as he stared at the letter in my hand. "Sophia, I can explain," he stammered, but I cut him off with a sharp laugh. "Explain? How exactly do you plan to explain this, Richard?" I waved the letter in front of him. "How long has this been going on?" He closed the office door behind him, his eyes darting nervously. "It's not what you think. It's complicated." "Complicated?" I spat the word back at him. "What's complicated about betraying your wife and family?" Richard ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I once found endearing. Now it just made my stomach churn. I never meant for this to happen. It just did. I stood up, anger coursing through me. "Things don't just happen, Richard. You made choices that affect all of us." A soft knock on the door interrupted us. "Mom? Dad? Is everything okay?" Lily's voice was muffled but concerned. Richard and I exchanged a panicked look. "Everything's fine, sweetie," I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "Just grown-up stuff. Why don't you go finish your homework?" We waited in tense silence until we heard Lily's footsteps retreat. Then Richard slumped into a chair, looking defeated. "What do you want me to say, Sophia? That I'm sorry? Because I am. God, I am." I wanted to scream, to throw things, to make him feel even a fraction of the pain I was feeling. Instead, I took a deep breath. "I want you to tell me the truth. All of it." And so for the next hour, Richard talked. He told me about meeting her at a conference 2 years ago, about how it started as harmless flirting and spiraled into something more. He spoke of guilt and temptation, of feeling trapped and alive at the same time. With each word, I felt our marriage crumbling around me. 16 years of love, trust, and shared dreams, all reduced to ashes by his selfish choices. "What about Lily?" I asked when he finally fell silent. "Did you ever think about what this would do to her?" Richard's face crumpled. "Of course I did. That's why I tried to end it several times, but it was never that simple." A horrible thought struck me. "Does Lily know? Have you said anything to her?" He shook his head vehemently. "No, never. I wouldn't put that on her." But something in his eyes made me doubt him. I made a mental note to check Lily's phone, just in case. The thought of involving our daughter in this mess made me sick. "So what happens now?" I asked, suddenly feeling exhausted. Richard reached for my hand, but I pulled away. "I want to make this right, Sophia. I love you. I love our family. I'll do whatever it takes." I looked at him, this man I thought I knew so well, and felt nothing but a hollow ache. "I don't know if there's anything you can do to make this right, Richard. I don't even know if I want you to try." His face fell, but before he could respond, we heard a crash from upstairs, followed by Lily's panicked cry. "Mom! Dad!" We raced up the stairs, momentarily united in our concern for our daughter. We found Lily in the bathroom, pale and shaking, surrounded by shattered glass from a fallen mirror. "I don't feel good," she mumbled, swaying on her feet. I caught her just as her knees buckled. As I cradled Lily in my arms, feeling her forehead burning with fever, I glared at Richard over her head. "Call an ambulance," I ordered. He hesitated, glancing at his watch. "I have an early flight tomorrow. Maybe we should just call the ambulance." My voice was ice cold. In that moment, I saw Richard for who he truly was, a selfish, unreliable man who put his own needs above his family's. As sirens wailed in the distance, I held Lily close, whispering soothing words. My mind raced with worry for my daughter and fury at my husband. One thing was clear. Our lives would never be the same after tonight. The hospital waiting room felt like a prison cell, its sterile walls closing in on me as I waited for news about Lily. Richard had left hours ago, citing his important business trip as an excuse. His absence spoke volumes about where his priorities truly lay. I clutched my phone, debating whether to call my mother, Grace. She'd know what to do, how to handle this mess. But telling her meant making it real, admitting that my perfect little family was falling apart. A doctor approached, his face unreadable. "Mrs. Thompson, your daughter is stable, but we need to run more tests. It appears to be a severe case of pneumonia." Relief washed over me, quickly followed by a new wave of worry. "Can I see her?" He nodded, leading me to Lily's room. She looked so small and fragile in the hospital bed, hooked up to various machines. Her eyes fluttered open as I entered. "Mom?" Her voice was barely a whisper. I rushed to her side, taking her hand. "I'm here, sweetheart. You're going to be okay." Lily's eyes darted around the room. "Where's Dad?" The question felt like a knife to my heart. He had to go on his trip, honey, but he'll be back soon." The lie tasted bitter on my tongue. Lily's face fell, and I saw tears forming in her eyes. "He always leaves when I need him," she mumbled. I stroked her hair, fighting back my own tears. "I know, baby. I know." As Lily drifted off to sleep, I stepped out into the hallway and finally made the call I'd been dreading. "Mom, it's me. I need you." Grace arrived within the hour, her familiar perfume enveloping me as she pulled me into a tight hug. "Oh, Sophia, what's happened?" I broke down then, telling her everything, Richard's affair, Lily's illness, his abandonment. Grace listened without judgment, her hand steady on my back. "That bastard," she muttered when I finished. "I always knew he wasn't good enough for you." Despite everything, I found myself defending him. "He's Lily's father, Mom. He's not all bad." Grace's eyes narrowed. "A good father doesn't abandon his sick child for a business trip, or cheat on his wife for that matter." Before I could respond, my phone buzzed. A text from Richard. "How's Lily? Sorry I had to leave. This deal could mean big things for us." Anger surged through me. I showed the message to Grace, who scoffed. "Big things? Like a divorce?" The word hung in the air between us. Divorce. Was that where this was heading? A nurse interrupted our tense silence. "Mrs. Thompson, your daughter is asking for you." I hurried back to Lily's room, Grace close behind. Lily was sitting up, looking slightly better, but still pale. "Grandma," she exclaimed weakly, managing a small smile. Grace moved to Lily's bedside, fussing over her. "Oh, my sweet girl, you gave us quite a scare." As they chatted, I noticed Lily's phone on the bedside table. A notification flashed across the screen. A message from Richard. My heart raced as I remembered his hesitation when I asked if Lily knew about the affair. Without thinking, I grabbed the phone, ignoring Lily's confused, "Mom?" I opened the message thread, my hands shaking. What I saw made my blood run cold. "Remember, Lily, not a word to your mother about what you saw. It would break her heart." I looked up, meeting Lily's wide, fearful eyes. She knew. She had known all along. "Sophia?" Grace's voice was concerned. "What is it?" I turned the phone screen towards them, watching as understanding dawned on their faces. The betrayal cut deeper than I could have imagined. Not only had Richard cheated, but he had burdened our daughter with his secret, threatening her into silence. In that moment, something inside me hardened. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about protecting Lily from her own father's selfishness. "Mom," I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me, "I think I'm going to need a good lawyer." The hospital discharged Lily after 3 days. Her condition improved, but still fragile. As we settled back into our home, the weight of recent revelations hung heavy in the air. Richard hadn't returned from his business trip, and I was grateful for the reprieve. I needed time to think, to plan. Grace had insisted on staying with us, her presence a comforting buffer between Lily and the turmoil threatening to engulf our family. As I tucked Lily into bed that night, her eyes met mine, brimming with unspoken questions. "Mom," she began hesitantly, "about Dad's messages." I took a deep breath, steeling myself. "It's okay, sweetheart. You can tell me anything." Lily's words tumbled out in a rush, detailing how she'd accidentally discovered Richard's affair months ago, how he'd caught her looking at his phone and made her promise to keep quiet. The guilt and fear in her voice broke my heart. "I'm so sorry, Mom," she sobbed. "I wanted to tell you, but Dad said it would destroy our family." I pulled her close, my own tears falling. "Oh, Lily, none of this is your fault. Your father had no right to put that burden on you." As Lily drifted off to sleep, exhausted by her confession, I slipped out of her room, my mind racing. I needed to see those messages for myself, to understand the full extent of Richard's betrayal. With trembling hands, I picked up Lily's phone from her nightstand. The passcode, her birthday, granted me access to a world I wasn't prepared for. The messages from Richard were worse than I'd imagined, manipulative, threatening, even cruel at times. He'd used our daughter's love and loyalty against her, against us both. "Remember, this is our little secret. Mom doesn't need to know. If you say anything, it'll break up our family." "Is that what you want? You like talking to your mother earlier. You didn't tell her anything, did you?" Each message felt like a physical blow. How could the man I'd loved for so long be capable of such callousness? But it wasn't just Richard's messages that caught my attention. There were others, from names I didn't recognize, with content that made my blood run cold. "Hey, Lily, got any more of those pills? My buddy's looking to buy. Your dad hooked us up last time. Can you ask him for more?" My hands shook as I scrolled through message after message. The pieces started falling into place. Richard's frequent business trips, the unexplained cash I'd found hidden in his desk, his increasingly erratic behavior. This wasn't just an affair. Richard was involved in something far more dangerous, and he dragged our daughter into it. A noise from downstairs startled me. I quickly replaced Lily's phone and crept to the top of the stairs. Richard's voice drifted up, low and angry as he argued with someone on his own phone. "I told you, I'll have the money soon. Just give me a few more days. No, you can't come here. My family doesn't know anything about this." I retreated to my bedroom, my mind reeling. The man downstairs was a stranger to me now, a liar, a cheater, and possibly a criminal. And he'd used our daughter as a pawn in whatever game he was playing. In that moment, I knew what I had to do. This wasn't just about saving my marriage anymore. It was about protecting Lily. It's about reclaiming our lives from the web of lies Richard had spun around us. I picked up my phone, my fingers hovering over the keypad. One call could change everything. To the police? A lawyer? My finger trembled as I made my choice and pressed dial. A sleepy voice answered on the third ring. "Sophia? What's wrong?" "Mom," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I need your help. It's time to take action against Richard, and I think we might need to involve the authorities." As I spoke, I heard Richard's footsteps on the stairs. Time was running out. Whatever came next, I knew one thing for certain. I would do whatever it took to protect my daughter and uncover the truth, no matter how ugly it might be. I ended the call with my mother just as Richard's footsteps reached our bedroom door. My heart raced, but I steeled myself for the confrontation I knew was coming. When he entered, his eyes bloodshot and tie askew, I barely recognized the man I had married. "Sophia," he slurred, "why are you still up?" I stood, my voice steadier than I felt. "We need to talk, Richard, now." He stumbled towards me, reaching out, but I stepped back. "What's going on?" he asked, his brow furrowing. "I know everything," I said, my words cutting through the tension. "The affair, The threats to Lily and whatever illegal business you're mixed up in. Richard's face paled, then twisted with anger. You've been snooping through my things? I didn't have to, I retorted. You left a trail a mile wide. How could you involve our daughter in this? He advanced on me, his eyes flashing dangerously. You don't understand. I had no choice. We needed the money. Money? I interrupted, incredulous. What about our family? What about Lily's safety? Richard's demeanor suddenly changed, his voice taking on a pleading tone. I can explain everything, Sophia. Just give me a chance. But I was done listening to his lies. No, Richard, I've given you chances. I've given you years. It's over. His face contorted with rage. You can't do this to me. You have no idea what you're dealing with. As he lunged towards me, I stumbled backwards, knocking over a lamp. The crash echoed through the house, followed by the sound of running footsteps. Lily appeared in the doorway, her eyes wide with fear. Mom? Dad? What's happening? Richard froze, the anger draining from his face. Lily, sweetie, go back to bed. Everything's fine. But Lily stood her ground, her gaze shifting between us. No, it's not fine. I heard you yelling. I saw the messages, Dad. I know what you've been doing. The room fell silent, the weight of Lily's words hanging in the air. Richard's shoulders slumped in defeat. I never meant for any of this to happen, he mumbled. I moved to stand beside Lily, placing a protective arm around her shoulders. It's too late for excuses, Richard. We're leaving. Tonight. His head snapped up, panic clear in his eyes. You can't leave. It's not safe. The people I'm involved with are exactly why we need to go, I finished for him. We're not part of whatever mess you've created. As if on cue, Grace appeared behind Lily, car keys in hand. The bags are in the car, she said, her voice firm. Let's go, girls. Richard made one last desperate attempt. Sophia, please. If you leave now, I'll lose everything. I met his gaze, feeling a mixture of pity and resolve. You already have, Richard. You lost us the moment you chose your secrets over your family. With that, I guided Lily out of the room, Grace following close behind. As we descended the stairs, I heard Richard's broken sobs echoing through the house we once called home. Outside, the cool night air hit my face, bringing with it a sense of both fear and freedom. As we climbed into Grace's car, Lily's small voice broke the silence. Mom, where are we going? I turned to look at my daughter, seeing the trust and uncertainty in her eyes. In that moment, I made a decision that would shape our future. Somewhere safe, sweetheart. Somewhere we can start over. As Grace pulled away from the curb, I watched our house disappear in the rearview mirror. The road ahead was uncertain, filled with potential dangers from Richard's mysterious associates. But one thing was clear. There was no going back. Whatever challenges lay ahead, we would face them together, free from the web of lies that had entangled us for too long. With a deep breath, I turned to face forward, ready to embrace whatever the future held for us. The address on the crumpled paper felt like it was burning a hole in my pocket as I stood outside the nondescript apartment building. My heart raced, but I steeled myself. This was it. The moment I'd confront Richard's mistress and unravel the last threads of his web of lies. I'd left Lily with Grace, telling them I needed to run some errands. They didn't need to know the risks I was taking. As I climbed the stairs, my mind flashed back to the conversation I'd overheard between Richard and his mysterious associates. Whatever he was involved in, it was dangerous, and I needed answers. I knocked on the door, my knuckles white with tension. A moment later, it swung open, revealing a woman I recognized from a photo on Richard's phone. She was younger than me, beautiful in a way that made my stomach churn with insecurity. "Can I help you?" she asked, her brow furrowed in confusion. "Are you Amanda?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. Her eyes widened in recognition. "You're Sophia, aren't you? Richard's wife." I nodded, pushing past her into the apartment. "We need to talk." Amanda closed the door, her face a mix of guilt and defiance. "Look, I know what you must think of me." "I'm not here to judge you," I interrupted. "I'm here for the truth. About Richard, about whatever illegal business he's mixed up in, all of it." She paled, sinking onto the couch. "How much do you know?" "Enough to know that my family is in danger," I said, my voice hard. "Richard's been threatening our daughter to keep quiet, and now there are people after him, after us." Amanda's eyes filled with tears. "I never meant for any of this to happen. Richard told me he was separated, that you knew about us. By the time I realized the truth, I was in too deep. What do you mean, too deep? I pressed. She took a shaky breath. Richard, he's not who you think he is. The business trips, the late nights, it was all a cover. He's been moving drugs, laundering money. I didn't know at first, but when I found out... He threatened you too, I finished, the pieces falling into place. Amanda nodded, wiping away tears. He said if I told anyone, he'd make sure I went down with him, but that's not the worst of it. My blood ran cold. What do you mean? The people he's working for, they're dangerous. They think Richard's been skimming money, they're looking for him, and they don't care who gets hurt in the process. As if on cue, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. We know where you are. Where's Richard? You have 24 hours. I showed Amanda the message, watching the color drain from her face. They must have followed you here, she whispered. Panic clawed at my throat. Lily? Grace. They were alone, unprotected. I have to go, I said, rushing towards the door. Amanda grabbed my arm. Wait, there's something else you need to know. Richard, he's been using Lily to make some of his deliveries. She probably didn't even know what she was carrying. The world tilted on its axis. My daughter, my baby girl, unknowingly caught up in her father's criminal activities. Rage and fear battled within me. I'm so sorry, Amanda said, her voice breaking. I should have told someone sooner. I turned to her, my mind racing. It's not too late. We can still fix this, but I need your help. Will you testify against Richard? She hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Yes, it's time to end this. As we hurried out of the apartment, my phone buzzed again. Another message. Tick-tock, Sophia. The clock is running. With Amanda by my side, I raced towards my car. We had 24 hours to find Richard, protect my family, and bring down whatever criminal enterprise he'd entangled us in. It seemed impossible, but I had no choice. Everything I loved was at stake. As I started the engine, I made a silent vow. No matter what it took, I would keep Lily safe and put an end to this nightmare once and for all. The final confrontation was coming, and I had to be ready. The clock was ticking as Amanda and I raced back to my mother's house. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. Every second felt like an eternity, knowing Lily and Grace were in danger. We need to call the police, Amanda said, her voice trembling. I shook my head. Not yet. If we do, Richard might run, or worse, those criminals might hurt my family. We need to find him first. As we pulled up to the house, I saw Richard's car parked haphazardly in the driveway. My heart leaped into my throat. He was here. Stay in the car, I ordered Amanda. If anything happens, call 911. I burst through the front door, adrenaline coursing through my veins. The scene that greeted me was chaos. Richard stood in the living room, wild-eyed and desperate, facing off against my mother, who stood protectively in front of Lily. Richard, I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. It's over. Step away from them. He whirled to face me, his expression a mix of anger and fear. Sophia, where have you been? They're coming for us. We need to leave now. No, Richard, I replied, moving slowly towards Lily and Grace. You need to turn yourself in. It's the only way to keep our family safe. His face contorted with rage. You don't understand. I did all of this for us, for our future. By putting our daughter in danger, I shot back. By using her as a drug mule? Lily gasped, her eyes wide with shock. Dad, is that true? Richard's anger crumbled, replaced by shame. Lily, I never meant for you to get involved. I thought I could protect you. Protect her? Grace interjected, her voice sharp. You've done nothing but endanger her and this entire family. As if on cue, the sound of screeching tires filled the air. Through the window, I saw 2 black SUVs pull up, men in dark clothing pouring out. They're here, Richard whispered, panic etched on his face. In that moment, everything seemed to move in slow motion. I grabbed Lily and pushed her towards the back door. Mom, take Lily and run. Now! Grace didn't hesitate, ushering Lily out as the front door burst open. 3 men entered, their eyes cold and calculating. Well, the leader sneered, his gaze fixed on Richard. Thought you could hide from us, did you? Richard stumbled backward, his bravado evaporating. I can explain. I have your money. Just give me more time. The man laughed, a chilling sound. Time's up, Richard. And look, you've brought your whole family into this mess. How thoughtful. I stepped forward, placing myself between the men and Richard. This ends now. You want your money? Fine, but you leave my family out of this. The leader raised an eyebrow, amused. And who might you be? I'm the woman who's about to bring your whole operation down, I said, my voice steady despite my pounding heart. I pulled out my phone, showing them the screen. I've been recording everything. One press of this button, and it all goes to the police. The room fell silent, tension thick in the air. I could feel Richard's eyes boring into me, a mix of fear and awe on his face. The leader's amusement faded, replaced by cold calculation. You're bluffing. Try me, I challenged. I have nothing left to lose. But you have everything to lose. As we stood in this tense standoff, sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder by the second. Amanda must have called the police after all. The leader's eyes darted between me, Richard, and the window. I could see the wheels turning in his head, weighing his options. In that moment, with the police approaching and criminals at my doorstep, I realized the true strength within me. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore, but for Lily, for our future. Whatever happened next, I knew I had the courage to face it head on. The leader made his decision, reaching slowly into his jacket. My breath caught in my throat as I waited to see what he would pull out. A gun or a white flag. The fate of my family hung in the balance, and I steeled myself for whatever came next. The leader's hand emerged from his jacket, not with a gun but a flash drive. This contains everything, he said, his voice tight. All of Richard's dealings, our operation, everything. It's yours. As sirens wailed closer, the men retreated, leaving us in stunned silence. Richard collapsed onto the couch, his head in his hands. Sophia, I'm so sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen. I felt nothing but cold determination as I looked at the man I once loved. Save it, Richard. It's over. The next few hours passed in a blur of police statements and tearful reunions with Lily and Grace. Amanda's testimony, combined with the evidence on the flash drive, was enough to bring down Richard and the entire drug operation. As dawn broke, I sat on the porch of my mother's house, exhausted but relieved. Grace joined me, wrapping a comforting arm around my shoulders. You did it, sweetheart, she said softly. You protected your family. I leaned into her embrace, finally allowing myself to feel the weight of everything that had happened. I just wish I had seen it sooner, Mom. I feel like I failed Lily. Grace shook her head firmly. You didn't fail anyone, Sophia. You showed incredible strength and courage. Lily is lucky to have you as her mother. As if summoned by our conversation, Lily appeared in the doorway, her eyes red-rimmed but clear. Mom, can I join you? I opened my arms and she rushed into them, burying her face in my shoulder. I'm so proud of you, baby, I whispered, stroking her hair. Lily pulled back, her expression serious. What happens now? With Dad, I mean. I took a deep breath, choosing my words carefully. Your father made some very bad choices, Lily. He's going to have to face the consequences of those choices, but that doesn't mean he doesn't love you. She nodded, her eyes welling with tears. And us? What happens to us? I squeezed her hand, including Grace in my gaze. We start over, together. It won't be easy, but we have each other, and that's what matters most. As the sun rose higher, casting a warm glow over the yard, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The road ahead would be challenging, but for the first time in years, I felt hope. Weeks turned into months, and slowly we began to rebuild our lives. I threw myself into my teaching, finding renewed passion in empowering young minds. Lily, with the help of therapy and our unwavering support, began to heal from the trauma of her father's betrayal. Richard, true to form, tried to reconcile once the dust had settled. He called, sent letters, even showed up at the house once. But each time I stood firm in my resolve. We're done, Richard, I told him during his last attempt. I've forgiven you for my own peace, but there's no going back. Lily and I deserve better. As I closed the door on him for the last time, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. We were free. One evening, as Lily and I sat on the porch swing, she turned to me with a smile that reminded me so much of her younger self. Mom, I've been thinking. I want to volunteer at the women's shelter downtown. After everything we've been through, I want to help other families who might be struggling. Pride swelled in my chest. That's a wonderful idea, sweetheart. We can look into it together. As we sat there, planning for the future, I marveled at how far we'd come. The pain and betrayal we'd endured had forged us into stronger, more compassionate versions of ourselves. I looked at my daughter, this remarkable young woman who had faced unimaginable challenges with grace and resilience, and I knew that whatever life threw our way, we would face it together. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. As darkness fell, I felt not fear, but anticipation for the dawn to come. Our story wasn't over. It was just beginning. And this time, we were writing it on our own terms.